This show is sponsored in part by the Missouri Automobile Dealers Association. New car dealers are the heart of Missouri, with over 20,000 employees in hundreds of local communities across the state.
And welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics. We're here this week on an especially exciting week as the Missouri Legislature reconvened on Wednesday, and we're very excited to have with us the newly elected Speaker of the Missouri House of Representatives, John Diehl. Mr. Speaker, welcome.
Hey, good. Glad to be on the show. Thank you.
So you elected 118 members in November. 117 were sworn in this week.
Correct.
What are you going to do with this majority?
Well, I'm actually really excited to be leading the largest Republican majority we've ever had in the history of the state. And I think what you're going to see is a continuation of some of the policies that we've started really when we took the majority almost, I guess it's been 12 years ago, and that is trying to reduce and keep in check the size of government and trying to foster policies that will allow businesses to prosper and grow in the state and also provide more educational choice to our students.
There's obviously a question that's on everyone's mind right now. What are you going to do about the Rams?
Well, yeah, I joke around, I'll punt on that question, you know, but
not on this show.
Not on this show. Yeah, there's no place to punt. You'll hold me to it. You know, I think that the situation with the Rams, and I think anytime you follow what's happened in other cities that have gone through this, it's a long, drawn-out process. There's a lot of posturing. But I do think there are a couple of principles that we've heard over the past week that I think is generally the right approach. Number one, we're not going to get involved in a bidding war with another city and be used as a stalking horse one way or the other, to either allow the other city to drive up what we have to do or vice versa. You know, number two, I think that the laws under the city and the St. Louis and the county of St. Louis are pretty clear that if those governments participate in the public financing for a professional sports facility, that requires a vote of the people of those jurisdictions. So I think that's something which will have to be done. And number three, I think it will be very, very difficult to move any sort of state public funding in a stadium bill through the General Assembly. And I haven't heard that proposed yet, but I think if that were proposed, I think that would be difficult to do. But
even all that, so is there hope for a Rams fan that they'll be here 5 years from now?
Oh, I think there is. I mean, I think this is as I said once again, I think it's a long, drawn-out process. I think the NFL is going to perhaps control the situation more than a particular owner is. And at the end of the day, I think you still have to sit back and look that, you know, why does this owner get the Los Angeles market when there are several other owners who are also in bad situations get that too? But I think it is going to come down to stadiums at some point. Sure. And I think it's just the very, very beginning of what you're going to see as being a couple-year process on how it plays out.
Well, this week was a big week for you. You gave your address to the legislature and the public in a big press conference afterwards, in that there was a headline grabbed out of that press conference about Ferguson that a lot of our viewers, some of them in rural Missouri, very much appreciate what you said about there's other priorities in the state. Some of your, I know, is very popular inside your caucus, but there's probably some folks in St. Louis that have a hard time understanding that it's not the priority to everyone that it is here. Would you like to explain a little bit more about your thought behind those comments?
Well, sure. I think it's first twofold. Number one, and I disagree a little bit that people here don't hear. I think there's a strong, silent majority of people not only in this region, but also across the state, that kind of feel that we're being a little too hard and that law enforcement and first responders are being scapegoats in this. And I think it's very critical when we look at the issues of Ferguson that we separate bad, long-term, systemic government policies from those on the front line that are there enforcing those policies. It's you know, what I liken it to a little bit is you know, like go back maybe to the Vietnam War. Should we have been in the Vietnam War? Sure. Maybe, maybe not, but you don't blame the soldiers.
Were you a little bit surprised
don't
the
take it
support
out.
you found in your own caucus
Oh,
when
absolutely.
you said that out loud?
Right. And so we're not going to do or pursue policies that make it more difficult for the people that we put on the front lines to do their jobs. So I think that's number one. Number two, what happened up in Ferguson, I think, is systemic of failed government policies, of having schools that don't work, of not having economic opportunities available for young people and for older people up there to actually fulfill the American dream and get ahead. And it's also a culture of governments existing for the sole purpose of existing only by finding their own citizens, and that shouldn't be the purpose of government.
Will the Missouri House pass a bill that restricts some of that taxation by citation, as Senator Schmidt said on this show?
Well, I think we're going to look very hard at it. I don't know if it'll be exactly Senator Schmidt's version. I don't know what the percentages are going to look like, but I think there's some interest in looking at that.
Speaking of Ferguson, you were pretty critical of the governor's lack of communication during the events. Have you spoken to the governor since you were sworn in?
We did meet yesterday. Ferguson was not on the agenda. It was just kind of more of a cordial first day visit. You know, I think it's, you know, when you're in a crisis, I think one of the most important things in a crisis is for somebody to step up and say, I'm going to make a decision, I'm in charge, and I'm going to be responsible for that decision. You may agree or disagree with what I decided, but I'm in charge and I'm willing to accept the consequences of it. So I think really the best thing for the governor moving forward, and if you would ask me about it, what I would tell him would be just come forward, explain what happened that night, you know, talk about what the consequences were of the different actions and why you made the decision.
You're speaking about the night the National Guard wasn't deployed.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, and you have firefighters getting shot at and all that, just unacceptable.
Going forward, there's been some criticism that the legislature and the governor don't talk enough. Do you have some ideas or any plans to try to engage him more in public policy before there's a veto decision?
Well, once again, we have quite an elaborate process to get engagement on issues. Anytime someone proposes a piece of legislation or a bill, it gets filed. That bill is referred to a committee, and at that committee there are public hearings. And not only do members of the public and people interested in that legislation come testify, but the governor's office and departments also are eligible and should come testify. But our door is open. My preference would be to work. I think people expect government to be functional and not necessarily gridlocked. And to the extent the governor's interested in trying to work together, my door is open.
Great. Let me just throw a couple issues at you this year and just get your quick take on them.
Sure.
One issue that's not been written about a lot in the press lately, but is on a lot of minds of legislators we've talked to, are tax cuts. Will you be looking at a tax cut this year?
I think we're going to look at other opportunities to look at tax cuts, but also to look at how we can streamline our current tax system to make it fair, perhaps maybe remove some loopholes in exchange for rate reductions. I think those are things we're looking at. I've got some members looking into that, and to the extent we can find opportunities to cut taxes, yes, we're going to take that opportunity.
The transportation sales tax was voted down pretty handily, but the needs are still there. Do you think there'll be some answer proposed in the House how to address the transportation needs?
Well, we as you know, the General Assembly put that matter on the ballot last year. The voters rejected that. I think we need to respect the wishes of the voters. Now, I think if you're going to go forward on a transportation issue, I think the first thing we have to do is make sure that all the money that's allocated for roads is actually being used for roads and not for other bureaucracy purposes. Number two, there has to be a clear list and a clear explanation of what is needed, and then those expenses have to be prioritized with everything else on the budget. So if we're saying building roads is our top priority, we also spend tens of millions of dollars on any things that are lesser priority. So make that your top priority, and then decide whether you need revenue increases for stuff that are lower priorities. If you still need the funding, then you move forward.
Speaking of revenue, what about Medicaid? There's been some talk that some senators have been pretty outspoken. What are your thoughts? I mean, are you going to let a Medicaid bill move through the channels and have a day?
I don't see much. I don't see a path forward for Medicaid this cycle. I think the voters in this state have spoken pretty clearly on that over the past 3 cycles. People have tried to make election issues out of it. It hasn't gotten any traction. I think what's happened on the federal level with Republicans taking over the U.S. Senate by a pretty resounding margin, I think you're going to see a lot of instability of the ACA at the federal level, and if and until that gets settled, I don't think that issue moves forward here.
There was a ballot measure put on the ballot by you. You carried the bill to get a sort of referendum by the people, and it did pass overwhelmingly against it.
Correct.
Do you still view that as a mandate not to expand Medicaid?
Well, I don't think that in and of itself. I think it's a continuum of things have happened since that time. So back when that was put on the ballot, there were 88 Republicans in the Missouri House. Mm-hmm. That passed in August of 2010, the Healthcare Freedom Act, by a 72% margin. And the 3 cycles that have happened with healthcare and Obamacare being a central tenet of that, our numbers have increased from 88 to 106 to 110 to 117 today.
Would you say you view the 2 issues as different? It's not the exact same thing.
It's not the exact same thing.
But the franchise law, that was a big topic at the very end of last session. Is that something you see being addressed?
The franchise law dealing with
automobiles.
Oh, with automobiles. Yeah. I haven't heard a lot about that in the past couple months. I understand there may be some litigation surrounding that issue that is going on or may be going on. I think it's something that we'll hear about. I think it's more of a general thing that you're seeing too, is do our laws coexist with technology and how people are using now? You can apply this to taxi cabs, you can apply it to how you buy a car, a whole lot of other things in our economy that sometimes our laws haven't quite caught up with how commerce is.
I think the president thinks immigration laws are that way too. He decided to not do
There's a law out there, enforcing it would be a good first start.
Education, last point. I mean, some of the topics you talked about in Ferguson, you've tied to education. You passed a bill out of the House, a pretty sweeping bill that was vetoed.
Correct.
Do you see that? I'm obviously going to revisit it. Will the bill you passed look something like the bill you passed last session?
I think we've been working on that in the interim. We've been working with senators on it. And I think that another education bill trying to deal with the transfer issue and providing some alternatives to education is something we're going to try to move early. I don't know if the private option is going to be the answer, but we may have a very kind of supercharged charter school possibility, as well as maybe more virtual education. But it's very important that children trapped in failing school districts have other opportunities now. We can't have another generation of lost kids.
Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
we appreciate
you.
it.
Appreciate it.
And we'll be right back with our This Week in Missouri Politics Opinion Maker Roundtable.
I was trying to fix all the things that were going on. Ryan's daydreaming, an inability to focus.
It was just frustrating to get my mom to understand what I was going through.
So that's when we talked to a doctor, and she was diagnosed with ADHD. It just explained so many things for us.
Hyperactivity isn't the only symptom of ADHD. Inattentive symptoms like Ryan's can be less noticeable. Learn more. Get the ADHD symptom checklist at keepmomming.com. Then talk with your daughter's doctor.
Keep momming.
And welcome back with our This Week in Missouri Politics Opinion Maker panel. This week we're joined by Sean Nicholson, the Executive Director of Progress Missouri, Representative Ron Hicks, a Republican from St. Charles County, Patrick Lynn, the Head of Governmental Advocacy at the Kelly Group here in St. Louis, and Gregg Keller, Principal with Atlas Strategies. Greg, let me start with you. What did you think of the speaker's comments earlier?
You know, I thought one thing really stood out, and that's that the speaker really had his finger on the pulse with regards to where the Missouri electorate is on this Obamacare or Medicaid expansion in the state. You know, from a policy standpoint, it's a real mess. There was a study out from the New England Journal of Medicine recently. They took a look at Medicaid or Obamacare expansion in the state of Oregon recently. That occurred in 2008 or 2009. and their study came out and showed that there was no rise in health benefits to people in Oregon who received Medicaid expansion or Obamacare expansion in their state. So you're talking about huge outlays of money with no real benefit to it. Of course, the economics of it are almost impossible. In Arkansas, they're learning that in the first 6 months of Medicaid expansion in Arkansas, it blew a $10 million hole in the budget there in that particular state. And of course, when you look at this politically, it's all but politically impossible here in this state. The guy in Arkansas who sponsored it, Burris, ran for state senate, ran against a guy who he outraised 3-1, who had never run for office before, and Burris lost. So it's politically impossible, it's economically impossible, and I think the speaker's exactly right to say we shouldn't do it here.
Sean Nicholson, our viewers who are Twitter followers of yours probably think you disagree about that.
Yeah, I think what we just heard from Gregg is pretty silly, both in terms of the economic reality and the political reality. We've got champions for Medicaid expansion in the form of Senator Ryan Silvey, who's hardly a hippie liberal. We've got Representative Jay Barnes from Jefferson City, who's hardly a hippie like me. We've got Senator Kit Bond, a champion in this, the Missouri Chamber of Commerce. What Gregg has done is totally mischaracterize the studies that have been done about Medicaid and Medicaid expansion. I don't think any one of us here would give up our health insurance voluntarily. We know that health insurance matters. We have 300,000 Missourians in the coverage gap. There's a way to make this happen. It's a morally right thing to do. There's a very clear way to make this happen, and that's why Republicans across the state are supporting it.
Patrick Lynn, you are one of the top policy people in the state of Missouri. Is there merit to what Gregg just said? Is there an economic downside to the state for Medicaid expansion?
I don't believe there is, and I think Medicaid expansion will happen. I think when you look at what Arkansas did not do a straight Medicaid expansion. As you have with a lot of Republican legislators, they think there needs to be a private marketplace-driven Medicaid expansion. That's what they did in Arkansas. They basically gave it to the insurance companies. That's why the costs are more.
Ron Hicks, Representative, you were the one at this table in that caucus meeting. You would know the political aspect of it. Is there a path for this?
The path everyone wants to take is, of course, reform it. I don't believe we should be throwing money into a system. I'm going to have to agree with Gregg 100% on this. We throw money into a system. How do we pay for it in the end? It sounds good for everybody, yes, I believe that, but our caucus feels this is something that cannot be expanded. It will be the expense of Missourians if we do so, and we're looking more into the reform of it. I mean, how can you expand something without reforming it?
So the two could go hand in hand, and that would be the possibility.
I really think, Greg, I think if the two sides got together and did that, we'd see a little bit more improvement.
Greg, I had a very conservative lawmaker stop me in the Capitol this week, and his point was, can't stand the president or any of his policies, can't think of anything he's done well except Osama bin Laden was killed on his watch. I mean, that's it. That's the only thing he thinks is good. But he said on Medicaid, he believes that why are we're paying the federal tax dollars into this terrible system, but they're all going other places. Why would we, instead of getting our tax dollars back, give it to California, Illinois?
So it's interesting. I mean, that's an interesting perspective from a conservative who wants to expand Obamacare in the state of Missouri. I would certainly posit, and I think
he'd rather have his tax dollars back, but I think the IRS will come to his house and take his home. He wants the dollars he has to give anyway back.
Right. So this is a disastrous federal program that is on its way towards bankrupting our country as we know it. It has already kicked millions and millions of Americans off of their health care insurance, and I think it's only common sense for conservative lawmakers to say we're not going to expand this. Again, what they tried to do in Arkansas, it was passed by a Democrat governor. Somehow the idea that we're going to come up with a government program that is going to be a bigger government program and that therefore we're going to save more money off of it than the state of Arkansas did, I don't think really passes muster. Again, they're $10 million in the hole after their first 6 months. They were $1 million in the hole after their first month. Every single month that they have been doing it,
we're
they
not
have ran a deficit.
Pig suey from you, is what you're saying.
I just think they made a huge mistake in Arkansas, and bear this in mind, mark my words, there's going to be a reckoning in Arkansas on this in a legislative matter. The people who were beating the drum for Obamacare expansion in the state of Arkansas, there's going to be a reckoning on this in the first quarter, maybe second quarter of this year, and I would be very surprised if they don't roll back pretty substantially what they unfortunately did previously.
Sean Nicholson, speaking of legislative reckonings, I think there was a general consensus that I think amongst the St. Louis, the media types, there was thought that this session would be kind of focused around Ferguson, and that's not what I heard from the speaker.
No, it was really frustrating when the speaker on Wednesday said there will be no Ferguson agenda. I think there have been dozens of proposals put forward by legislators who represent Ferguson and other communities in the state, saying, hey, here's some ways that we can move forward to heal, to restore trust between the community and the people who volunteer to serve and protect all of our communities. So I think there are some bipartisan real solutions and ways to respond to what's happening in Ferguson and the protests that have shone a light on police brutality excesses. So that was pretty frustrating to hear on Wednesday from the speaker.
Senator Schmidt, a conservative senator from St. Louis County, proposed ending the taxation by citation. Is there a liberal opposition to that?
Not that I've heard.
Ron Hicks, does that pass?
I think so.
And is that part of a Ferguson agenda?
No, I don't think it's full Ferguson. I think it's across the state as far as that goes. You have a lot of small, right here locally. You can right by our airport. Go by there. You'll find out real fast what I'm talking about.
But also, I think some of our viewers here on ABC 30 in St. Louis will know that you go through Forrestal, you better tap your brakes, right? I mean, I don't know what their budget is, but a lot of that revenue has to be from tickets. Patrick Lynn, you go to Jeff City a lot. Do you tap your brakes at Forrestal?
I do, and I've gotten multiple tickets there too when I haven't tapped my brakes.
So it's not just a North County problem. It is. There's the Max Creek is actually in rural Missouri. It's just a government problem.
It is. I do think there'll probably be something will pass that dealing with municipal courts and the citations. I don't think it'll be Senator Schmidt's bill. Senator Sifton also has a bill. I mean, I think it could be his bill, but I think it'll be in a different form. I think the municipalities have a lot of influence on the legislature, and I think there's a little pushback to some of that, and I think that'll slow down what the bill actually does.
Speaking of some of the electoral politics issues we've discussed, the Missouri Times today put out a poll about the 2016 governor's race. It polled Catherine Hanaway and Tom Schweik, one announced candidate, one highly speculated that will be a candidate, against Chris Koster, an announced candidate for governor, and another speculative one, Senator Claire McCaskill. The poll found Schweik and Hanaway losing by 4 and 6 points to the Attorney General, and it found Schweik and Hanaway both defeating Claire McCaskill by double digits. Does that surprise you, and what does that say about the opportunity and the potential pitfalls the Democrat Party faces?
It does not surprise me. Senator McCaskill is a known entity with all Missouri voters. Everyone has an opinion of her. You, for the most part, you either like her or you don't like her. So I'm not surprised. Attorney General Koster, a little less of a known entity. It's probably a little more positive, being Attorney General, former prosecutor, in his current position, so it's not surprising. I think the greatest concern for Democrats is how long does this stalemate on who our gubernatorial candidate is drag on. It needs to be decided as soon as possible, and I think it's the best for...
Ron Hicks, you've got to be dreaming about the bills you could not only pass but get signed by Governor Schweik or Governor Hanaway.
Absolutely. I mean, you want to talk about moving our state forward? That's what we need. We need it. It was mentioned earlier about the governor interacting with the legislature. This is my second term. I've seen him over there twice, and each time it's to address the caucus on an issue, or like last night, you know, the inaugural ball, things like that. I haven't really seen him over helping out in policies, in any level for that matter. Maybe it happens behind closed doors. I'm not going to say it's not happening, but it's not happening to where we view it or the public can view it.
You know, as a member of the House, I've heard that criticism, and it only gets worse if you talk to a House Democrat. Sean Nicholson, when you look at those numbers from the liberal wing of the party, you know, that would probably not like some of the policies the representative is very excited about passing, what do those numbers say to you?
I think they confirm Chris Koster's status as the front runner in this race. He's been an established candidate. He's been very successful statewide, and I think it confirms that people don't like Washington, D.C. very much right now, regardless of who's there and which party. So that's what these numbers say to me.
Gregg Keller, I know you've picked a horse in this race, but you're a political pro, been through the whole state multiple times. What do these numbers say to you?
Claire McCaskill's numbers are absolutely abysmal. I think it should serve as a warning to those people who, you know, she's been in Washington, D.C. As we were discussing earlier, it's going to be very difficult for her to separate herself from Barack Obama. I think it should be a cautionary tale to those people here in Missouri who are thinking about passing some of Obama's top priorities here in the state. Also, full disclosure, I do work for Tom Schweik. I don't think it's any particular surprise that Schweik does nominally better in this race than does Catherine Hanaway. He's won twice statewide already, including one of the most smashing and overwhelming electoral victories the state's ever seen in November.
Can you give our readers a little peek into Do those numbers mirror something you're seeing in the numbers you get to see, not just with the Schweik campaign, but all over the state?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear. I think it's all but impossible to make the case that at this point Catherine Hanaway is a better statewide candidate than Tom Schweik is. He's won twice.
Are the senator's numbers dismal in your polling that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, Claire McCaskill's numbers are pretty terrible. The question isn't whether or not is Claire McCaskill going to run for governor. I think it would be seen as a suicide mission at this point. I think the question is she going to run for Senate re-elect in 2018? And I think the smart money is on the fact that she won't even try to do that. I think her political career of winning elections in this state is over.
Patrick Lynn, you're a veteran of statewide campaigns. You're used to seeing the Republicans take these things they're favored in and just absolutely fumble the ball on the goal line. Is it a little bit of deja vu, the seat you're in now, watching this possible run, maybe not run happen?
Yes, yeah, you usually have Republicans, their gubernatorial primaries, everyone runs and they beat each other up and then the Democrats come in and win. Look, I still think at this point in time, Chris Koster will be the governor come 2017. I'm confident in that.
Is there anything in statewide Republicans' history, recent history, that would predict they would get this fortunate and it not be Chris Koster?
No.
I mean, they're gonna. I mean, he could lose as becoming a red state, but they're gonna have a much tougher time, right?
They are. I think what the biggest problem is, as Gregg said, is Senator McCaskill is looking at her future political career and seeing she probably has a tough re-election. Though, as we saw in 2012, the Republicans handed that to her. Things change. You know, depending on what happens in the presidential race in 2016, a lot can happen with that in 2018. I think Senator McCaskill does care deeply about the state of Missouri and where the government is and the citizens of the state, and she may be looking too that this is a time that maybe she'd like to do more to help the
Speaking
state.
of things that everyone's passionate about, one last question. Will the Rams stay? Sean Nicholson.
Doesn't look like it.
Representative Hicks, are the Rams going to be here 3 years from now?
I'm not thinking so, no.
No chance? Would you give them public money to stay?
No, I would not.
Patrick Lynn, is there Rams
that.
football in St. Louis 3 years from now?
There will be professional football in St. Louis 3 years from now.
Nice. Gregg Keller, are the Rams in St. Louis 3 years from now?
As the Rams, unfortunately, no.
No. Well, we will be back next week. That's all for this week on This Week in Missouri Politics. We look forward to seeing you then. Thank you for joining us.